I would have been like, okay, look, I got a souvenir from the aliens, from my peoples. If you don't believe me, believe this. Ha! Ah! A pack of alien condoms. Stop! Though, let's go.
Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. And today, I'm going to tell you 3 stories that demonstrate that. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, the next time you're at the beach with the like button, wait until they take off their sun hat to go run into the water, and while they're gone, fill their hat up with mayonnaise. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories.
Hell! Dice roll. Dice roll.
On the afternoon of June 29, 1934, a 37-year-old police officer named Captain Alan Falby
Was the title of this Bleeding Out? Did I see that right?
Throttle on his police motorcycle and sped down a street in El Paso, Texas. Captain Falby's motorcycle lights and sirens were on because he was chasing a speeding pickup truck down the road. But despite the fact that obviously Captain Falby was in pursuit of this person, they were not slowing down at all. So Captain Falby had been a police officer for 11 years, and he loved his job, he loved his motorcycle, and he hated when suspects got away. So he kept his hand on the throttle and kept chasing down the suspect, but suddenly
I would feel like some officers kind of secretly want, like a chase, you know? Like, I don't know if it's just me, but like, if I was an officer and you try to, drive away, drive away, and I'm chasing you, oh boy, that gets me going. Cause when I had the white car, I had a stick shift back in the day, man, I used to love racing. Not like illegal, like, it kind of sounds bad. But like, I don't know if y'all understand what I'm saying. Like, anybody that has ever had a stick shift or had a stick shift right now, switching gears and controlling that speed, oh my God. It's just, oh God. I used to be zooming and whipping and I don't do it no more, you know. I'm trying to start a family. I got a wife, I'm slowing down, but whew.
He was going after slammed on its brakes and swerved hard to the left. Falby tried to slow down, but it was too late. He slammed into the back of this truck, and then he and his bike went sliding across the asphalt for a few seconds, and the whole time, Falby is feeling his body getting totally scraped against the pavement, and the wind's getting knocked out of him. And then finally, when he came to a stop, he was splayed out in the middle of the road, and his motorcycle, his beloved motorcycle...
I'm not gonna lie to you. If I saw that, like if I was a regular pedestrian and I saw that, I was like, oh, damn! And I would have just kept driving. Is that bad? That's bad, isn't it? That's bad. That's horrible. That's horrible, isn't it? That's so bad. That's so bad. Damn!
was laying on top of him, pinning his legs under him. And this bike weighed like 500 pounds. And adding insult to injury here, as Falby is screaming out in pain.
That's why it's important to do leg day. Who's that one character from Naruto? The one that has that dog, that big dog? Chino? No. No. Chino is the big guy. I forgot his name.
because obviously horrible injuries have been sustained here. He looks down the road and he sees the truck he was chasing, who clearly knew he just wrecked behind them. They're not going to stay and help. They just drove off, protecting themselves. And so pretty quickly, Falby kind of assessed the situation he was in. He tried for a second to push this bike off of him, but not only could he not move it, but every time he moved it just a little bit, the weight would kind of come down even harder and a little bit more pointed on his legs, which were crushed, and he had this excruciating pain down there. And worse, he's looking underneath him, and he's seeing this growing pool of blood. Clearly, he's sustained potentially life-threatening injuries here, and he's all alone. There's nobody here to help him, and he's totally stuck. And so even though he began calling out for help, the reality was, if nobody came along soon, he was done for. And he found himself starting to panic. Luckily, though, just then, 2 men from down the road came running up to Captain Falby. Apparently, they had been sort of behind the captain and were watching him pursuing this truck, and they had actually seen the accident. And so they had pulled over, and they were now running up to see if he was okay. And so right away, without even needing to ask Captain Falby what he needed, these 2 men saw the situation. The bike is pinned on top of the cop. And so together, these 2 men were able to lift this heavy motorcycle off of the captain's legs. And as soon as they did, all 3 of them looked, and they could clearly see, the reason there's all this blood all over the pavement. There was this huge gash in Captain Falby's leg right above his knee that was just pouring out blood. And Captain Falby, he saw that, and he was already starting to feel lightheaded from blood loss, but just seeing this.
I'm so animated, yo. I'm so animated. By nature, really, in real life, I would have helped him. I would have helped get the bike off of his legs. Ah! Ooh, man. Look down at his legs, seen that pool of blood. Damn! Oh! Jesus.
Wound was totally disorienting. Fortunately, though, the 2 men who had arrived on the scene to help Captain Falby kept their composure. And one of them actually noticed that Captain Falby was wearing a necktie. He had a formal police uniform on that had, a necktie as part of it. And he gently reached over and he told Captain Falby to relax, and he undid his necktie. Meanwhile, the other man, he ran over to the side of the road where this big tree was, and he got a stick, a pretty sturdy stick. And so the guy who undid the necktie, he tied it around Captain Falby's leg above the wound, basically cutting off circulation to that wound, a tourniquet. He tied it off, and then the other guy came back over with the stick, and he handed it to the guy with the necktie, and he took the stick and threaded it carefully through the necktie that was now wrapped around the captain's leg, and he began twisting the stick, wrapping up the fabric as he twisted it, which in turn mechanically tightened that tourniquet around the captain's leg, much tighter than you could do, without something mechanical. This is somebody who clearly knew how to make a real tourniquet out of sort of everyday materials. And so they tie off the super tight tourniquet, they stop the bleeding, and it ultimately saves Captain Falby's life. In fact, by the time Captain Falby actually got brought to the hospital and they took off this DIY tourniquet and patched him up for real, the doctor would tell Captain Falby that, he was about 10 minutes away from death, blood loss. So had it not been for those 2 guys who showed up and made that tourniquet, he very likely would have died. 4 years later, on December 12th, 1938, Captain Falby was back at work. And he had been, ever since maybe 6 months after his injury. He had just gone back to work, fully recovered. He did have some scar tissue on his leg, but he was basically back to full capacity. And so on this particular day, Captain Falby was on patrol like he normally was in El Paso when he got a call over the radio about a bad car accident that had happened out on Route 80, which is a major road in that town. And so Captain Falby races over to the scene, and he sees there's this car that's clearly veered off the road and smashed into a tree, and the driver, or who appears to be the driver, is sitting still in the driver's seat, and they were unconscious. And so Falby was the first on the scene. He pulls over, he gets off his bike, he rushes over to the car, and he carefully pulls this unconscious man out of the car, and he lays him on the ground, and he sees this guy has a horrible gash in his leg, and it's bleeding profusely. But because this basically mirrored the exact same type of injury that Falby himself had had 4 years earlier when he crashed his motorcycle, Falby knew what to do. He didn't have, a issued tourniquet on hand, but he knew how to make one. He had a necktie, and there were sticks on the side of the road. So as quick as he could, he rushed over, grabbed a sturdy stick, took off his necktie, tied it around this man's leg, used the stick to tighten it up even further, and he cut off the bleeding to that wound. And so at this point, now that Captain Falby has realized that, okay, this guy appears to be stable now, he's not actively bleeding, he's clearly still breathing, albeit unconscious, but, it seems like he has a fighting chance here. So he's waiting for paramedics to show up and take this guy to the hospital, and he's just sitting there sort of, happy he was able to be here and save this guy, when he sort of looks at this guy and he realizes something. The man he had just saved with his DIY tourniquet was literally the actual same guy who had saved Captain Falby with a DIY tourniquet 4 years earlier. Captain Falby had never even gotten the guy's name. They had not stayed in touch after his accident. They had gone separate ways. But now he's looking down at this man and he's realizing it's the same one. The guy's name was Alfred Smith, and he would make a full recovery. But when he was rushed to the hospital, they would say, you were within about maybe 10 minutes of bleeding to death had it not been for Captain Falby. So literally, this DIY tourniquet story played out almost exactly the same way with these two guys doing it to each other, but 4 years apart. Later on, Captain Falby and Alfred Smith would give an interview to Ripley's Believe It or Not to talk about the incredible coincidence that saved both their lives. And when the interviewer at some point congratulated Captain Falby on his heroic efforts, Falby simply stated, quote, "One good tourniquet deserves another."
You see, Alfred Smith was the man who put the tourniquet around my leg and saved my life when my motorcycle hit that truck. After all, one good tourniquet deserves another. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring.
Mr. Brawler, come on with this better. Come on. What you racked up, huh? What you racked up? $50,000 so far? From BetterHelp? You racked up $50,000 from BetterHelp? Okay, look. I'm not gonna lie. I thought he was gonna say the guy leg that he saved. Or like the guy, yeah. Was the guy that was the guy that got away from the chase. I thought that was gonna be him. And I was gonna be like, well. Look at who we got here. Look at what we got here. You remember me 4 years ago? Do you remember me? You made me crash. I almost bled to, I'm on your bed. What? I didn't say nothing. You almost made me bleed to death. Almost. And I see you bleeding out. Now I could save you. I could. Am I? Matter of fact, that's like that scene in Breaking Bad when Jesse's, I think that's what his name, his girlfriend, they was like doing drugs and she was choking on her saliva, and I forgot his name, but he was looking at him. I mean, he was looking at her, about to save her. He was like, oh. But then he realized she was a bad influence on him. So he was like, and he just watched her get choked out by her own vomit. Same thing. I would have just looked at you while you bled out. Jesus Christ.
10% off your first month of therapy.
Okay. I literally heard you. The first 50 times you were sponsored by it.
On the evening of December 16th, 1984, a 24-year-old electrical engineer named Hao Ran walked through the courtyard of a pretty low-rent, seedy apartment complex in Hong Kong. He held hands with his longtime girlfriend, 23-year-old Jen Yu. The pair had just finished having dinner together at Hao Ran's apartment, which was part of this complex, but now he was walking his girlfriend across this courtyard to the other side of this complex, where her apartment was located. And so Hao Ran always walked Yu home, The pair had been together for a few years now. They'd actually met in college after a close mutual friend had introduced them, and ever since then, they had been inseparable. And so Halron was just sort of protective of Yu. And he felt like their neighborhood was not very safe, and so anytime, especially at night, when he knew his girlfriend would be sort of out and about in their neighborhood, he would walk with her to keep her safe. And so that's what he was doing tonight. Eventually, the couple reached the front door of the section of this complex that would lead up to Yu's apartment. And so the two walked in through the front door, and they made their way over to the building's elevator bank. There were 2 elevators. Halron reached over and pressed the up button, and then he and Yu just stood there and waited. And as they waited, they began to hear the familiar sound of one of the old elevator cars clanging its way down the elevator shaft. These were old and creaky and really kind of sketchy elevator cars that both Halron and Yu hated riding on. But Yu lived up on the 13th floor, and neither of them liked walking up that many steps, and so it was sort of like...
Go ahead and get that cardio in! Get that cardio in there!
Their choice is to ride one of these elevator cars. And so eventually the car came down, the doors dinged, they opened up, and nobody was on the car, and so Halron and Yu stepped inside. They pressed 13, the doors rattled to a close, and they slowly began going up. And the whole time they're going up, neither of them spoke. It was just kind of like anxious anticipation that, hopefully this car will make it all the way up to the 13th floor. And so as they're moving up, they're hearing the car banging into the walls, and it's just so uncomfortable.
Jesus.
But eventually they do reach the 13th floor, it dings, the doors open up, and both of them are so relieved when they step out of the car onto solid ground. And they make their way over to Yu's apartment, and the two, they give each other a hug and kiss and say they had a really nice time together. And then Yu, she retreats into her apartment, and Halron goes back down the hallway and presses the down button to go back down the elevator. And sure enough, a couple of seconds later...
You don't want to take the steps down? Jesus! You starting to stress me out a little bit. Because everybody knows going down the steps is a lot easier than going down up the steps. You could have just went down the steps. I prompt, man.
Halron heard the familiar sound of the elevator car shaking and banging against the shaft as it made its way up to him. There was a bell sound, the doors opened up, nobody was on the elevator car. Halron stepped inside, pressed the lobby button, turned around, and watched as the doors closed. And then slowly he began to go down. And again, as he's going down, Halron had that same sort of nervous energy, hoping this elevator didn't come to a, lurching stop or something, that it just got him down to the ground safely. And so he's going down, it's floor 12, 11, 10, down he's going. And then at floor 7, the car came to a stop.
Okay.
But it was kind of a hard stop. Not like emergency status hard, but it was a fairly hard stop at floor 7. And so Halron, he's instinctively thinking, okay, well, clearly someone on the 7th floor has called the elevator. And the doors are going to open any second here, and, someone's going to get on. But as he's waiting for the doors to open to alleviate this sudden stress that, oh my God, is something wrong here? The doors don't open. And instead, the elevator suddenly lurches down another foot. It stops. But clearly, this is not normal elevator behavior. There is something wrong with this elevator. Like his worst fears are coming true. And the doors still are not opening. And so Halron's looking around wondering, what's he going to do? What can he do? He's trying to tell himself that everything's okay. Maybe the doors still will open up, but they're not.
It's not okay. You live in a complex. It's clunked all around. But I promise you the steps are a lot safer and a lot better than the elevator right now. The elevator is clunked the hell up. And I promise you, somebody got clunked up before you got clunked up in the elevator. God damn.
And then he begins to smell something. It was almost like a sort of chemical smell. He couldn't really place what it was, and he's sort of looking around, wondering what's going on here, and his panic is rising, like this is a bad situation, has no idea what's happening, but clearly something bad is going on here. And then this already horrible situation gets 1,000 times worse, because he looks down and he sees the floor of the inside of the elevator is now on fire.
So all of this could have been avoided if he just took the steps. For real? Well, I don't. No, it would have been better for you to take the steps, 100%. Cause now you trapped with the elevator that's on fire. See, like if you was in the steps and it was on fire, I mean, at least you could move around the fire. Like, you know what I mean? You got some space. You're trapped.
And as he's realizing the floor is on fire, and that's what he was smelling, is like this burning smell, he sees his own legs are now on fire. And so in a completely panicked, like fight or flight moment, Halron remembered that most elevator cars have an escape hatch somewhere, usually on the ceiling. And he looked up and he couldn't believe it. There it was. There was this escape hatch to get out of the car. And so right away, that's what Halron began trying to do. He kind of scaled the walls of this car. He punched open this hatch and he climbed out of the elevator, out of the fire, saving his own life. And so while all this chaos was happening in the elevator shaft, Halron's girlfriend, Yu, was in her apartment looking out the window. And her view was basically the same courtyard that she and Halron had walked across just, 5 minutes ago to get to her apartment building. And it was sort of customary that every time he would drop her off at her apartment, she would look out the window and wait for him to come out the front door, and she would watch him walk back across that same courtyard to his building on the other side. And so Yu sort of understood how long it would take, for Halron to come down the elevator and walk out the door. But now it had been, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, and he still hadn't come out the front door, and there really wasn't any reason for him not to have exited the building at this point. And she started to get worried. And so given the fact that Yu, much like Halron, was fearful that those old elevators in this building were eventually going to get stuck while they were on them, given she had that fear, she instinctively was like, oh my gosh, maybe he's stuck in the elevator. Like, that's why he hasn't left the building yet. And so instinctively, she left her apartment and walked down the hallway to the elevator bank, and she looked up above the doors, and it showed where the respective cars were located. And she saw that one of the cars was stuck at floor 7, and it wasn't moving up or down. It didn't matter if she pressed the button, that car would not go up or down. The other car would, but not that car. And so it convinced her that Halron has got to be trapped on that elevator car. He's stuck right there. I better call authorities. And so she did. She called the fire department and said, hey, my boyfriend, I believe he's trapped in the elevator. And so just a few minutes later, the local fire department showed up to the apartment complex, and they walked up to the 7th floor where they believed, this car was stuck. Now, they were not in some crazy, emergency mode running down the hall to open up this elevator car, because they're thinking, it's really just an inconvenience getting stuck on an elevator car. It's not like life and death. And so they just make their way up to the 7th floor by taking the stairs. And then on the 7th floor, they go over to the elevator bank where the 2 doors are to the respective elevator cars. And on the one that, shows the car is stuck on floor 7, it says the number right above the door. They use their tools to pry open the doors to see, the car right behind it. And once they pry it open, they do see the trapped elevator car, and it's not exactly where it's supposed to be. It's not sitting, right in front of the door. It's actually situated sort of below the 7th floor. They can basically only see the top of the elevator car. Like, this car has actually gotten stuck between the 7th floor and the 6th floor. But that in and of itself was not a huge thing. I mean, they could basically mechanically move this car up and down if they needed to, either up to the 7th or down to the 6th.
They don't immediately smell the fire or the smoke? What? Alright. What?
Whoever was on the car out. What they noticed right away, though, which was the way bigger problem, is they smelled and saw smoke coming from this elevator car, the trapped car. And so the firefighters immediately go into, okay, we got to figure out where this fire is coming from. Is it coming from this elevator car? Is it somewhere down below at the bottom of the elevator shaft? Like, they don't know. But from their perspective, outside looking into the shaft, they could see that the hatch, the emergency hatch on this stopped elevator car was open because they can see the roof of this car. And they're thinking, okay, maybe the trapped guy is right in there and we can look down, grab him, pull him out, and deal with this fire. And so they go in, they're yelling out Halron's name, and they look down into this elevator car. They're literally on top looking through this hatch, and they see the carpet inside of this car is all charred and burned, and there's some smoke sort of sitting inside the car. but there's nobody inside the car.
My man better not be burnt down to a crisp. He better not be... He better be somewhat okay. He better not be in no ashes. Oh, Jesus. State ain't so sway.
Empty, but they see there's blood all over the inside and up on the walls. And then they realize there's also blood kind of coming up, through this hatch, and it's on the top of the elevator car. Clearly, whoever was in this car was badly hurt as they exited out the roof. But now the firefighters are wondering, well, where did he go? Did he fall down to the bottom? Because basically there's just these two elevator cars that move up and down inside of this singular shaft. There's basically nothing dividing the two shafts that these elevator cars move in. It's kind of like one big shaft. And so to the side of this frozen car is this huge shaft, multi-story shaft that goes all the way to the ground. And they look over the edge and they shine their light down the elevator shaft because, the car on this side was up top. It was not obstructing their view. And sure enough, there is a man, maybe one floor down, who looks very badly injured. He's got cuts all over him. He's bleeding. It looked like his ankle was broken. And he was sort of huddled on this very small platform, basically one floor below. At every floor, when you walk onto the elevator, when those doors open up, there's a 1 foot long little platform that extends into the shaft just enough that it meets the entrance to the car. So when the car opens up, you walk across this little platform into the elevator, the door's shut and it goes up or down. But if you're in the elevator shaft, each floor basically has that little protrusion, that 1 foot, small platform. And there's the guy, presumably Howron, who is positioned, perched on the one right below them, on that little platform. And so, of course, the firefighters forget the fire, because, that's a separate issue at this point, and they got to go rescue Howron. And so they go down to the 6th floor, they open up the doors, they grab Howron, they pull him into the hallway where he is safe. He's obviously in an enormous amount of pain. He's been burned. He's got a broken ankle. He's in rough shape, but it appears like he's going to survive. And so as the firefighters placed Howron on a stretcher, and he's barely talking, he's very shaken up. He's just laying there. And so at this point, the girlfriend, she found out the firefighters had saved her boyfriend, and he was on the 6th floor. And so she comes charging down the stairs, runs down the 6th floor hallway to be by her boyfriend's side. And she looks at Howron for the first time, and she just freezes. And she stares at him. And she says, "That's not my boyfriend."
What?
It would turn out this whole elevator disaster was highly coordinated.
What?
Because what neither Howron nor his girlfriend knew was that the same mutual friend who had actually introduced the two of them deeply regretted it. He himself was in love with and he couldn't bear to see her with another man. And so this mutual friend, whose name was Liu Wenjong, that night he had secretly waited until he was sure Howron had climbed on the elevator car by himself, and then he had cut off electricity to that car, freezing it at the 7th floor, actually between the 7th and the 6th floor. And then he climbed on top of the elevator car, opened up the hatch just enough to pour kerosene into the car with Howron.
Oh my.
That was the smell that Howron began to talk about and smell inside the shaft. He clearly knew there was something off, but Howron didn't realize it was, this friend of his right above him. And then before Howron could even understand what was happening, Liu lit a match and threw it into the elevator car. That was what caused the big fire. But then, when Howron panicked and climbed up out of the hatch to save himself, Liu was waiting for him, and he stabbed Howron and then threw him off the roof of this elevator car, where he fell all the way down 7 floors to the bottom of the shaft, where he died. The man that was crouched on that platform, 1 floor below where this car was Liu. And basically what he did is, after murdering Howron, he leapt onto that platform from the top of this elevator car down onto that platform, sort of intentionally to hurt himself, to make it seem somehow like, he was just trying to help Howron, but then, basically fell and hurt himself too. He didn't do anything wrong, but when they looked at Howron inside the shaft, he was clearly stabbed. Then also they knew this fire had been started on purpose. It was clearly arson. And so once all this evidence had piled up and it was pretty obvious that Liu had done it, he did confess, and he was ultimately sentenced to life in prison.
Oh, God. Ladies and gentlemen, when somebody confesses their feelings to you, please be careful and choose your words wisely about if you turn them down. You know? Because it's like, I know y'all heard the saying, the worst thing she can say is no. The worst thing he can... No, that's the least thing that they can say. People are mean. They can literally be like, no. And then say all this other disrespectful, cluck, off the wall shit. When all you could have just said was no. But nah, you gotta add all this extra stuff. So now, you see, now I gotta not cluck you up because I still love you, but I'm gonna cluck up the person that you're with at the time, or the next person you're gonna be with, or now I gotta cluck up your moms, or now I gotta cluck up your dad, your brother, your sister, like, I'm not gonna cluck you up because I still love you, but best believe the ones closest to you, they gonna get it because of what you said. Please let them people down gently. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say it at all. Jesus, you never know how people are going to react. He was a good-looking guy. He was probably crazy, though. I'm not going to hold you. She probably saw past those, like, pretty eyes of his and saw craziness and cluckness deep in his eyes, like back in there. That's probably why, because on the outside, he looks like a pretty good-looking guy, but sometimes people can see the craziness. Sometimes people can see the cluckness in you that others probably can't see. Yeah.
One evening in February of 1966, a 34-year-old man named Jose Luis Peña walked down a staircase inside of a cafe in Madrid, Spain. At the bottom of the stairs was this sort of basement seating area. It was pretty quiet, only a few people were down there. But Jose Luis, as soon as he was down there, he saw his friend, Fernando Sesma, had already found a booth on the other end of the seating area, and he was beckoning Jose Luis over. And so Jose Luis, who had come here to meet Fernando, eagerly walked over towards him. And then before he even sat down, Fernando, who was grinning ear to ear, he held up this envelope and showed Jose Luis, like, I gotta tell you about this. So Jose Luis and Fernando were both members of a small club called Baleña Alegre, which means happy whale in Spanish, and their meetings were all about aliens and UFOs. Now, Fernando was actually a post office employee during the day, but at night, he was the de facto leader of this club, and he'd always been fascinated by aliens. As for Jose Luis, he actually was much more of a skeptic. He actually kind of actively did not believe in aliens, UFOs, or anything paranormal. But about a month prior, he'd had this sort of inexplicable,
So he really believed that we were the only ones in the universe. Come on.
Sighting, or he didn't even know what it was. He was driving along and thought he saw something in the sky that didn't necessarily make him a believer. But he didn't know who to talk to about this thing he had seen. He couldn't make sense of it. And so that's how he had found his way into this group. It was just because it was an outlet to talk about this weird thing he had been through. And to be honest, he didn't know if he'd be staying any longer than maybe the next couple of weeks. He was just here for now. But regardless, Jose Luis and Fernando had made plans to meet up in this cafe tonight to sort of catch up on all things about the club before their actual club meeting that was going to happen maybe 30 minutes from when they were actually meeting. But as Jose Luis is sitting down, Fernando's got this envelope that he's really excited about. And once Jose Luis sits down, Fernando puts it in front of him and he's like, look, there's no return address. And he points, there's like this strange symbol on the outside of this envelope, and it just looks sort of foreign, like Jose Luis didn't really even know what he was looking at. But Fernando, who again is a full believer, he says to Jose Luis, he's like, I just got this letter, and I'm going to show it to the club tonight, because I think it's from an alien. Now, when Jose Luis heard this, He was open to the idea of UFOs being a thing because, again, he couldn't explain what happened to him, but he just felt like, give me a break. Like, what, an alien sent you a letter? Why? Why would they send you a letter? And he sort of said as much to Fernando, but Fernando, he was ready for this. Like, he knew Jose Luis was a skeptic, and he knew he would cut this letter apart. But Fernando, he took the envelope back, before Jose Luis could say anything more about how fake this was, and he pulled out the letter inside. And the letter, it was typed out, so it wasn't by hand, it was by typewriter. And the writer wrote that they were literally from an alien race called the Ummites, and they'd come from a planet called Ummo. And they said that, the Ummites had very advanced technology, and they'd actually already been living on Earth for the last 16 years. However, humans didn't recognize them because they sort of looked like normal people. And so this alien writer said, for all these years, they had been searching for, a true believer to share this secret with. And apparently, the believer they had found was Fernando. Now, Jose Luis could tell that Fernando was really excited, and so he sort of throttled back how much he sort of rained on his parade here, and he just let him have his moment and said, wow, that's really interesting. And then before long, the other members of their club came into this basement seating area inside this cafe, and as soon as they were all assembled, Fernando got up to the front of the room and he held up this envelope and he said, you won't believe it. I got this letter. It's from an alien race. They want to talk to me. Like, can you believe this? We finally have proof. The aliens are here. And unbelievably, as he says this, Jose Luis is looking out to get the reaction of the other folks in the club to see how invested they are, in this new revelation. And Jose Luis can't believe it when others in this club begin reaching into their bags and pulling out identical looking envelopes with these strange symbols on them. And they're like, we got these letters too. We just got them last night. We brought them here for this meeting. Can you believe it? And so the whole meeting was completely dominated by, talks of the Ummite alien race and how, these letters have got to be legitimate. Like, this can't be a prank the way Jose Luis said it could be a prank. Like, this has got to be real. Who would want to prank us? We're just this little group that, investigates the paranormal. Like, why would anyone care about pranking us? And Jose Luis said to them, that's why, because you believe in the paranormal and they're playing into that. Like, you're the perfect target to be pranked. That's why this is likely happening. But pretty much the entire club disagreed with Jose Luis, and they reminded him, Fernando in particular, that he should recall the club's motto, which was to believe everything until proven otherwise. Basically, the whole group was demanding that Jose Luis keep an open mind, because this might be the exact moment most of them were all waiting for. A little over a year later, in June of 1967, and Jose Luis was back inside at that basement seating area of that cafe in Madrid, Spain. To this point, Jose Luis had continued attending these meetings of the Balena Alegre. He'd thought about leaving a couple of times, especially as this whole Ummite fervor had really took hold inside the club. He didn't buy it, but he had stuck it out and continued attending meetings. But on this particular day, he was here for a very specific reason. It was because he had seen an article in the local newspaper that he knew the club would be really eager to see. So at this point, Fernando actually was writing a weekly column in the newspaper about the Ummites, because shortly after getting that first letter and all the other members of the club getting those letters, he had written to the news, they had been really interested, and asked for weekly updates. And sure enough, over the past year, the club continued receiving these letters, Fernando included, from the Ummites, whoever they were, and he would write these update columns. And really, by this point, a year later, that column had become really popular in Madrid. And so people of Madrid were pretty invested in the Ummites and, whatever was happening with them. And also adding to the intrigue was these letters were no longer just arriving on the doorsteps of Balena Alegre members. They were arriving in front of random people's homes all over Madrid. Like, random people were being contacted by, this alien race. Now, Jose Luis still very much believes that there is no way this could be real. Like, this can't actually be aliens. But the Ummites had basically become the only conversation topic in the club every time they met. Like, it was all they ever talked about. And it increasingly felt like it was a lot of what Madrid talked about. I mean, this was a big deal at the time. But today, the reason Jose Luis had brought the newspaper to bring to the group was actually because, they had published something that even to Jose Luis was pretty unbelievable. It wasn't an article that Fernando had published. It was not, another recounting of another letter showing up. It was actually, this newspaper themselves covering what appeared to be a local UFO sighting. And apparently somebody had captured a photo of this, presumed UFO, and that photo had been published in the news. And wouldn't you know, on the outside of this alien craft was that same strange symbol that adorned the front of all the Ummite letters that Fernando and the club members and all people of Madrid were getting from these Ummites. It was the same symbol. And so it sort of felt like for the first time, it was not just, letters that could be fabricated and sent to the masses. It was like this vehicle that had shown up in Madrid that had that same symbol, like it had to be the Ummites. Also, remember, it's 1967. And so faking photographs was very hard to do, at least, making something look convincing. And so that's why Jose Luis, he had brought this newspaper in to show the other members of this club, to be like, you know what, I gotta say, this is pretty unbelievable. And, the reaction from the club was equally amazed. They had all already seen this photo. I mean, they are completely locked in on all things Ummites. And so this photo was sort of like the centerpiece of that day's discussion. And Jose Luis found himself sort of admitting that, this is pretty unbelievable and I don't know what to make of it. But by the end of the meeting, Jose Luis still cautioned the group, like, look, I know this looks so real and it feels so real. I mean, I'm bringing this to you.
I would have been like, okay, look, I got a souvenir from the aliens, from my peoples. If you don't believe me, believe this. Yeah. A pack of alien condoms.
It's pretty unbelievable. But there's just got to be an angle here. Somebody has to be faking this. Like, there isn't a way that some alien species is doing this. This just doesn't feel real to me. But at this point, it was like everybody shut him down. They're like, hey, you brought this to us today. You're the one saying this is hard to deny. Like, this makes it feel real. And so at this point, forget your dissenting opinion. What we need to do as a group is take the news of the Ummites and this photograph and all the letters and not just show it to the rest of Spain, but we need to show it to the whole world. And so sure enough, after that, Fernando began going on TV and insisting the Ummites were real, which actually did cause mass panic across all of Spain. People couldn't explain the thousands of letters and that UFO photo, and so belief in the Ummites really caught on. And while Fernando and seemingly the entire general public of Spain became increasingly radicalized, Jose Luis grew more isolated from his friends in Belena Alegre. And soon he quit attending meetings altogether. And then shortly after that, he began going on TV, but not to advocate for the belief in the Ummites, but the opposite. To say, stop believing in this. There's no way this is real. But nobody really listened to him. The Ummite story had really taken on a life of its own, and it was sort of beginning to spin out of control. A few years after the Ummite letters began showing up and making headlines, two men had lied down on railroad tracks and basically taken their own lives by letting the train run them over, and police actually...
Oh my God! Oh my God! How do you just talk over that? Like, you didn't just... Oh, Jesus! You really just gonna talk over that, Mr. Ball, like you just say what you just said? That's horrific. I need some details on that. Like, were they completely conscious? Huh? Did they feel all of that before they died? Or was it like they didn't have no pain? They didn't feel nothing. Oh, God.
Found notes in these men's pockets that just said, the aliens call us. And given the timing of, their deaths, it seemed like it had to be connected to the Ummites. Then, two Spanish sisters died in a murder-suicide, and police discovered they had been receiving Ummite letters that might have contributed to this crime. By the 1970s, there were also multiple Ummite-related cults operating in Spain, and one of those cults targeted young boys. And in the early 1970s, when Jose Luis's own son was 7 years old, that child was targeted by one of these cults to be brought in because of his father. Like, they were trying to bring this child in to be exposed to who knows what, just because of Jose Luis's public stature as it related to the Ummites. Now, Jose Luis's son would not be pulled into that cult. He would be just fine. But for Jose Luis, this was pretty eye-opening and terrifying. You know, the idea that his family could be targeted because of this Ummite stuff was crazy. And so around that same time, Jose Luis stopped trying to tell people to not believe in this stuff and instead retreated from the public eye and just tried to live a quiet, isolated life. Over the next several decades, people all over Spain continued receiving Ummite letters, and nobody knew why. And these cults that, sort of focused on the Ummites continued to flourish and continued to believe that absolutely the Ummites are real. As for Jose Luis, he really did try to live a private life away from all this craziness, but it was hard to escape it. I mean, he would see Fernando on the news all the time talking about the Ummites, and he even published a book about it. I mean, it was kind of everywhere. But everything changed in 1996, 30 years after the first Ummite letter was received. One night in 1996, people all over Spain gathered in front of their TVs very expectantly as there was going to be this special report about the Ummites. And when the guest of honor, who was going to be a big part of this special report, came on screen and began talking about the Ummites, it truly shocked the entire country. This person explained that in their own lives, they had recently had a near-death experience. And that experience had made them realize it was finally time to admit to the world that they had made the whole Ummite thing up. It really was a hoax. They said they had written those first Ummite letters and sent them to Belena Alegre because they believed they would be susceptible to believing in the hoax. And they also said they really did fake that photograph that was put in the newspaper of the UFO with the strange symbol that matched the symbol on all those letters. But the person said, after that, they sort of had no intention to keep up the hoax. However, the story kind of took off, and all these copycats began sending their own Ummite letters to random people all over Spain, and then the news picked it up, and it was everywhere. And even though this person was trying so hard to literally tell the world that they faked this thing, nobody listened. The hoaxer was none other than Jose Luis. He literally had done this just to show the Belena Alegre how easy it was to get people to believe in aliens and conspiracies, because that's what people want. He basically wanted to show them that he was skeptical and he had this UFO experience and he was trying to get to the bottom of it, but everyone's like, oh, it's gotta be aliens.
Yeah, it's all fun and games to him until a real UFO comes up to him in his personal space talking about something. Oh, you thought that shit was funny? You thought that shit was cute, huh? Oh, okay. Come here, let me show you something. Let me show you what we got going on in our planet over here that's, I don't know, 1 billion light years across. Come here for a second, let me show you. Like, what? You making fun of us? Okay, let me show you something. Say less. Less was said.
And it's like, no, let's step back and be rational. He was trying to prove a point. That, look, I faked aliens writing to you and you all believed it. Like, how are we going to actually figure out what's real and what's not? But he wasn't expecting it to take on a life of its own. However, Jose Luis's confession never actually reached Fernando, because Fernando died years before Jose Luis admitted this really was a hoax. And so he died absolutely still believing that Ummites were real. And despite the fact there were at least 4 deaths linked to this Ummo craze, and also there were all these cults that were doing who knows what, probably illicit and illegal things, also tied to the Ummo hoax, despite all that, Jose Luis never faced any criminal charges. He died in 2014.
Oh, he died. Damn.
Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. All right, until next time, see ya.
I honestly wonder if he ever had a real life, like either paranormal or alien encounter. But like that paranormal entity or alien came up to him and was like, if you ever do something like that again, I'm gonna cluck you up. I dead ass. Because this is what I think. It's like, if you can imagine something, if you can picture something, it probably already exists in a different universe, in a different, you feel me? So, that was probably real. Them Ummites was probably a real species in a different galaxy, in a different universe. And they probably went to him one night, one day. It was like, if you ever make fun of us again, we're coming back for you, and we're going to gut you from the inside out with some alien condoms. Find somebody else to play with. I promise you, boo-boo, if you say something about us again, we're going to come back here, 10 gang, and we're going to gut you from the inside out. And please, don't tell nobody about this conversation that we had, okay? Because even if you say something, we're going to come back and we'll gut you from the inside out. No, that was, yeah. I'm pretty sure, I mean, I don't know. It's like you don't believe in something, but then when something happens, now you believe it. No, I believe in aliens. I believe in the afterlife. I believe in a lot of things. That don't mean I want to see. Like, I believe in ghosts and spirits. That don't mean I want to see them. You know? But there's 100% life. And it has to be a life in our galaxy, in our universe. It has to be. Like, 100%. Like, you're crazy if you think otherwise. But keep it cool. Keep it classy. And I love you. Stay happy. My family.